The director of World Food Programme warns that the conflict in Ukraine would deepen hunger in Yemen. Life is back to normal in Usaylan district in Shabwa after the liberation from Houthi militia. Safer oil tanker poses danger to Yemen and the entire region. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Shazad Dilbey. The Russian invasion of Ukraine will increase fuel and food prices in Yemen. WFP Executive Director David Beasley said in a statement, "We have no choice but to take food from the hungry to feed the starving, and unless we receive immediate funding in a few weeks, we risk not being able to feed the starving." This report has more details.
The UN World Food Programme said on Thursday that the Russia-Ukraine war will likely raise gasoline and food costs in war-torn Yemen, forcing more people to go hungry as aid money dries up. The statement came as Russia initiated a full-fledged invasion of Ukraine, pushing oil prices beyond $100 per barrel. European wheat prices have also reached a new high due to concerns of reduced supply, since Ukraine and Russia are two of the world's largest producers. WFP was forced to lower food supplies for 8 million people in Yemen earlier this year, as the 7-year civil conflict between the government and Houthi rebels brings the nation to the verge of starvation. According to the WFP, the escalation of conflict in Ukraine is likely to further increase fuel and food prices, and especially grains in the import-dependent country. Food costs in most of Yemen have more than doubled in the last year, putting more than half of the nation in need of aid. Food costs would rise, trapping more people in a vicious cycle of hunger and reliance on humanitarian aid. "We have no choice but to take food from the hungry to feed the starving, and unless we receive immediate funding, in a few weeks we risk not even being able to feed the starving," WFP Executive Director David Beasley said.
Standing here, one of our distribution points where people have been fleeing war and conflict inside Yemen, and we don't have the money that we need, and we're having to cut literally 8 million people to half rations, and within a few weeks, we're going to have to cut them to no rations. And just when you think that's bad enough, we've got a war now in Ukraine, and we get 50% of our grains out of the Ukraine-Russian area. It's going to have a dramatic impact on food costs, shipping costs, oil, and fuel. And just when you think it couldn't get worse, it's going to get worse.
Aid funding in Yemen is drying up during what the UN has dubbed the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The WFP needs about $800 million in the next 6 months to provide full assistance to 13 million people.
Head of Aden Trade stated that escalation of tension between Russia and Ukraine will aggravate hunger and food security crisis in Yemen. An official in trade and industry sector in Aden has further warned of a severe crisis in stocks of goods and foodstuffs in Yemen. Head of Chamber of Commerce and Industry in Aden also stated that the tension may have catastrophic consequences far beyond the European sphere reaching Yemen, which suffers from economic and humanitarian crisis. Yemen is escalating into a catastrophe as humanitarian funding dries up, forcing millions of Yemenis to fall prey to famine. Last week, the UN humanitarian chief Martin Griffiths warned with a deep sigh that many aid agencies would suspend work in Yemen due to funding crisis. This report has more details.
Countdown to catastrophe begins in Yemen as funding for food assistance will decline. The escalation of conflict in Ukraine is likely to increase fuel and food prices, and especially grains in the import-dependent country. Food prices have been doubled across much of Yemeni districts over the past year, leaving more than half of the country in need of food assistance. The World Food Programme decided to cut part of the food aid to Yemeni citizens, which has worsened the situation. World Food Programme provides food assistance to 13 million people every month in Yemen, but the organization was forced to decrease food supplies for 8 million people at the beginning of the year due to a shortage of funding. WFP stated that they need around $800 million in the next 6 months to provide full assistance to the 13 million people it has been assisting till now. Last year, WFP has delivered more than 1 million tons of food and over $330 million in cash and voucher assistance to families across Yemen. However, this can't be the same scenario for now, as the world passes by tension due to the war in Ukraine. Higher food prices will push more people into the brutal circle of hunger and dependence on humanitarian assistance. For Yemenis, the timing couldn't be worse. As families try to put food on the table, they are being hampered by the knock-on effects of a serious escalation in fighting alongside the continuing deterioration of the economy in the country.
Local sources said that dozens of families of those killed by the Houthi militia are suffering poverty and beg for food. The sources stated that the militia distributes food aid only to families of the dead, while ignoring the families of the rest of the killed tribesmen. A widow of one of the Houthi militias said that she was forced to beg for providing meals for her children and paying the rent of the one-room house she lives in. A Houthi shelling targeted citizens on residential neighborhoods east of Taiz with a number of missiles. The sources stated that the number of missiles fell in the neighborhood of Muhammad Ali Osman School, Wadi Saleh and Shamasi neighborhood, causing heavy material damage to citizens' homes. Government forces managed to shoot down a Houthi militia drone the day after 4 aircrafts were shot down in Hajjah. Meanwhile, the coalition destroyed a military tank belonging to the Houthi militia north of Abs. The coalition targeted 8 air raids for militia gatherings and military patrols in the banks southeast of Harad. 1 month passed since Shabwa was liberated from the hands of Houthi militia. Life started to become normal and people expressed their happiness of being freed from this terrorist Houthi militia. This report has more details.
After more than a month from the restoration of Asailan district in Shabwa from the Houthi militia's control, life is returning to normal in the district's markets and areas, government facilities and vital sectors. Naqoub market is one of the main markets in which the Houthi militia has paralyzed life and various activities during its control over the district.
Thanks to God, Usaylan district was liberated from the control of the Houthi militia after the great suffering that the district went through as a result of the war in 2015 and 2021. We thank God. Now we enjoy security and stability in our district during the current period.
Why the people express their joy of liberating their district from the militia's control. Their children are looking forward to an urgent intervention by the local authority and the government to address the destruction left by the war on citizens' properties and infrastructure, such as roads, communications, and electricity, and the return of the displaced to their homes.
This district suffered a lot from the lack of basic services such as telecommunications and infrastructure. Everything was destroyed by Houthi mines and explosive devices. Now, the situation is getting better. We call on authorities and local councils to take a look at this district and pay attention to its needs, along with other districts that suffered from Houthi rule.
Although Asailan district is one of the most affected districts in Shabwa in terms of the extent of the damage to public and private properties and the displacement of thousands of its residents, as it was a battleground twice. People's voices are rising in rejection of what they said is the unfairness of the district in terms of relief and humanitarian aid granted to other districts, some of which were not affected by the slightest damage, and all at the expense of the suffering of the actual affected.
UNICEF is building 2 schools for displaced students in Ma'rib as part of its developments and interventions. The 2 schools are provided with water and sanitation facilities to allow displaced children to return to school. The organization stated that the displaced children also have the right to access education and continue their studies. The Coast Guard forces in Hadramaut announced the capture of weapons and missiles while carrying out a military operation in Mukalla. An official source said that 2 modified machine guns, 66 modified bullets, and 99 Kalashnikovs were seized. The sources explained that one of the suspects was arrested for transporting weapons from the coast of Mukalla to Al-Abari, and a gun belt was found during the investigation of his car. An international organization has called on the United Nations to take measures to avoid the potential explosion of the Safer oil tanker. The organization stated that a blast will extend to countries bordering the Red Sea and have non-destructive environmental effects on nearly 670,000 fishing workers. Greenpeace said that without a quick fix, a tank explosion could have devastating effects and environmental impacts in the region. Different international organizations have voiced concerns over the potential danger of the Safer oil tanker, yet Houthi militia continues to allow the UN maintenance to have access to Safer oil tanker. This report has more details.
Leading environmental group Greenpeace warned Thursday of a potential major oil leak or explosion on an aging oil tanker moored off of Yemen's Red Sea coast and used as a bargaining chip by the Iran-backed Houthi militias. The neglected vessel kept under guard is loaded with more than 1 million barrels of crude oil. Greenpeace released a report listing the environmental, humanitarian and economic impact of a potential oil spill from Safer on the conflict-riddled Yemen and the Red Sea region in general. Last month, a Yemeni government official said there was an oil leak from the tanker. The UN has constantly warned of the catastrophic impact of a potential leak from the aging and neglected tanker. However, none of its diplomatic efforts to resolve the matter has materialized. Last year, the United Nations accused the rebels of using the tanker as a bargaining chip to advance their political agenda in Yemen. The 42-page Greenpeace report argues that an oil spill or explosion on the tanker would lead to disclosure of desalination plants in Yemen, which will eventually disrupt the supply of drinking water to nearly 10 million people. A major spill would also lead to the closure of Yemen's western ports, including Hodeidah and Salif, through which 68% of aid is brought into the Arab world's poorest country, the report said. Up to 8.4 million people relying on food aid supplies would be affected, said the Amsterdam-based advocacy group. An oil leak would also cause the closure of fisheries, the rise of air pollution levels in the region, and the disruption of shipping traffic through Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Suez Canal, said the report. Experts say maintenance is no longer possible because the damage to the ship is irreversible. The question is no longer whether the catastrophe will happen. The question is, when will it happen?
Coming next. In Dubai Expo 2020, Yemen brings honey, coffee, and ancient history.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف والكيس الدقيق ب18,000 والكيس السكر اليوم ب20,000. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما ندب احنا شرقية ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. Dubai Expo 2020 is a big event in which more than 163 countries have brought their local showcases. Yemen, enjoying a rich history dating back to the dawn of civilization, has a unique partition where Yemen's famous honey and coffee have been presented. This report has more details.
In Dubai, with the theme Knowledge for the Power of Infinity, Yemen showcases its millenary history to visitors of Expo 2020 Dubai. The pavilion of the Arab country at the World Exhibition features artifacts and manuscripts that marked its history. Yemen is also showcasing and selling items such as locally produced honey and propolis. The pavilion located within the Sustainability District brings a guided tour of writing, agriculture, and mathematics history. In addition to the content displayed in the pavilion, the Gulf country also has a store with products for sale. Among the items is a honey produced in Yemen. Producer Sulaiman Uthman explains his brand that has different types of honey. It is produced by bees of the same species and in the same region, but because they are arranged next to distinct species of trees, they gain different characteristics and colors. Yemen also exhibits other items such as propolis produced and processed in the Gulf country. Another essential product for the country is coffee that has a reserved place at the local exhibition. Yemen is famous for being a pivotal agent in spreading the seed worldwide. A plant native to Ethiopia, merchants from the Arab country first bought and exported Arabic coffee through the port of Mecca starting in 1450. Today, the port gives its name to different items related to coffee, from the mocha drink to a more rounded type of bean considered naturally sweeter. The country also has coffee-producing regions. Yemen has long been renowned for producing some of the best honey in the world. The highest quality and purest, it comes from bees fed exclusively on flowers of cedar, producing a pale-colored honey with a fiery, almost bitter aftertaste.
The Central Bank of Yemen in Aden stopped dealing with more than 20 exchange companies for committing violations. The bank directed all transfer networks to stop dealing with suspended exchange companies for violating regulations issued by the bank. The bank vowed to take the maximum measures against anyone who violates these regulations. The Yemen Gas Company in Ma'rib decided to raise the price of domestic gas cylinders by an increase of 1,200 riyals over the current price. A circulating document indicated that the new price for agents in Ma'rib will be 4,200 riyals and the selling price to citizens will be 400,500 riyals after adding transportation fees and agents' interests. On the other hand, the selling price in Safer will be 3,500 riyals and transportation fees will be added to it. The World Food Programme has warned that the war in Ukraine will increase fuel and food prices in Yemen, which could push more people into starvation. The organization added that the aid funding and food supplies for 8 million people are cut. The organization further stressed that food prices in Yemen were doubling during the past year, making more than half of the country in need of food aid. Severe domestic gas has hit the country nationwide. People already crushed by war are striving to secure a cylinder of home gas in order to help feed their families. This report has more details.
Preventing the arrival of trucks loaded with domestic gas coming from Ma'rib imposes an imminent crisis in Aden and the rest of the governorates that Ma'rib delivers gas to. About 2 months ago, the districts of Aden have witnessed a stifling crisis in the matter of domestic gas, after it has almost completely disappeared from most private stations, causing a major crisis. Official sources have warned of an upcoming crisis of domestic gas threatening the city of Aden in the coming days. The Director General of the gas facility in Aden, Murad Nasser, stated that trucks transporting domestic gas coming from the city of Ma'rib were detained. He warned of the outbreak of a crisis due to the detention of trucks and the almost complete lack of material inside the city, if measures are not taken with the concerned authorities. Local sources said that the price of a 20-liter cylinder has risen in recent weeks to 15,000 riyals, while long queues of transport vehicles operating with the same substance stand in front of private stations. Local residents in the city of Aden complained about the continued lack of domestic gas and oil derivatives. Amid suspicious government silence, they demanded the Ministry of Oil and the oil and gas companies to provide the two materials to the citizens to ease their living burdens. Citizens attributed this to what they called government chaos and the absence of oversight at the oil company, the ministry, and transportation offices. They also demanded a reduction in fuel prices in line with the depreciation of the US dollar against the national currency. They held the ministry responsible for not announcing updated pricing that coincides with the recovery of the currency's value, and demanded that violators from the owners of gas stations and transport vehicles should be caught. People suffer from deteriorating living conditions as a result of the war. Domestic gas and fuel crisis has constituted an additional burden and doubled the suffering of citizens in light of the deteriorating economic and living situation.
The National Committee Against Coronavirus recorded 5 new cases of the pandemic. Committee officials says no deaths and 88 cases of recovery were recorded. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 11,759, including 2,131 deaths and 8,688 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. The director of World Food Program warns that the conflict in Ukraine would deepen hunger in Yemen. Life is back to normal in Osailan district in Shabwa after the liberation from Houthi militia. Safer oil tanker poses danger to Yemen and the entire region. This is the end of the news. Thank you for watching.